The Armanoid Invasion, Part 2.
But before we get too deep into the video, first I want to tell you guys about my social media platforms. So I have a Clubhouse account and we can actually talk to one another on it. I also host Clubhouse rooms every now and then where I might talk about history and genetics of the Middle East and Africa. I have a Twitter page, a Facebook account, and a Facebook page, as well as a Instagram, all titled The Hebrew of Israel. And what I typically do on these platforms is post upcoming videos as well as slides for my presentations. And so just be on the lookout for all of that on my social media platforms. And if you want to support me financially for the channel, you can look at my Patreon as well as my PayPal and my GoFundMe. And with all of that out of the way, let's begin with the video.
We're still looking into the evidence of an Armenoid invasion of the ancient Near East, or, in better words, a migration of non Semitic northern peoples into Semitic lands in the south of them, aka Mesopotamia, the Levant, and Arabia. This time, we will be focusing on 1. Migration patterns, 2. Change of environmental effects culturally, such as pottery, 3. Genetic population replacement, 4. The genetic difference from a Semitic genome and a non Semitic genome, 5. The phenotype difference between a Semite and non Semitic person. Is there more evidence of a shift and change from Semitic to non Semitic in the ancient Middle East? And remember, think of the Armenoid invasion in similar terms to the Aryan invasion of India. Just replace everything that I said Armanoid with Aryan and India, and it's basically the same thing. The migration of the Armanoids, the Kura-Araxes culture. Let's briefly remind ourselves of the Kura-Araxes culture. This is from early Bronze Age migrants and ethnicity in the Middle Eastern mountain zone. And it reads, the Kura-Araxes cultural transition exists in the highlands of the South Caucasus from 3500 to 2450 BCE, before the Christian era. By 3000 BCE, groups bearing this identity had migrated southwest across the wide area from the Tartarus Mountains down into the southern Levant, southeast along the Zagros Mountains, and north across the Caucasus Mountains. In this new place, they became effectively ethnic groups amid already heterogeneous societies. This paper addresses the place of migrants along local populations as ethnicities and the reason for their disappearance in the diaspora after 2450 BCE. Kura-Araxes as a cultural tradition. How do we know that we are dealing with groups of ethnic migrants? The cultural importance of this pottery style is that it dominates the area of the earliest appearance of the Kura-Araxes cultural tradition for a millennium or more. In areas out of the homeland of the South Caucasus, the current nation states of Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and northeastern Turkey. And by the way, the pottery, I didn't have it underlined, but the pottery that they're talking about is that, here it is right here, a distinctive handmade black burnished pottery that I mentioned in previous videos dealing with the Kura-Araxes culture. So here is a map of the distribution of the Kura-Araxes culture, and it starts off in between the Kura and the Araxes rivers in the Caucasus, south of the Caucasus, and then its earliest dates are here, or its oldest dates are here, and then as you expand outwards, you get closer and closer to later dates. So, and this is the pottery, the the black burnished with the red rim pottery. This is typical of the Kura-Araxes culture, as well as other elements such as the spirals you see. So there was a migration of these Caucasian peoples of the Kura-Araxes into the Fertile Crescent. There are multiple reasons for this migration, such as warfare, finding better land, as well as climate change, and etc. We were able to determine this great migration based on cultural artifacts such as pottery and other materials. So here's a great paper actually detailing the migration and the disappearance of the Kura-Araxes culture over time. This paper is called The End of the Kura-Araxes Culture, as seen from Nadir Tbilisi in Iranian Azerbaijan. And so it reads, by the late 4th to early 3rd millennium BCE, Kura-Araxes, early Trans-Caucasian material culture, spread from the southern Caucasus throughout much of Southwest Asia. And the Kura-Araxes settlements declined and ultimately disappeared in almost all the regions in Southwest Asia around the middle of the 3rd millennium BCE. In this field report, we argue that the Kura-Araxes culture in the Western Caspian lateral plain ended abruptly and possibly violently. To demonstrate this, we review the current hypothesis about the end of the Kura-Araxes culture and use results from excavations at Nadir Tbilisi in Iranian Azerbaijan. The Kura-Araxes settlements declined and ultimately disappeared in almost all regions of Southwest Asia around the middle of the 3rd millennium BCE. There are two prominent theories explaining the end of the Kura-Araxes culture. The first highlights the role of environmental factors in the abandonment of the Kura-Araxes settlements. The second theory stresses the role of migration and the arrival of new groups of people into the region. This includes a large reduction in the number of settlements and increase in burial sites, the appearance of collective burials and impressive royal kurgans included increased mobility and changes in ceramic traditions. In addition, there was a clear increase in metalwork, especially in the gold and silver attested mostly in rich burials. To some scholars, all these transformations suggest the arrival of new groups of people with a new lifestyle based on transhumanist pastoralism. The test trenches at Nadir Tbilisi suggest that the Kura-Araxes occupation ended abruptly in the mid-3rd millennium BCE, and that the site was then occupied or visited by a new group of people with new cultural traditions. Evidence for a significant destruction followed by the sharp discontinuity in the material culture could represent a violent termination of the Kura-Araxes occupation at Nadir Tbilisi. From a broad perspective, the abrupt and possibly violent end of the Kura-Araxes occupation at Nadir Tbilisi, together with the sudden disappearance of the Kura-Araxes settlements and the scarcity of post-Kura-Araxes sites in the Mughan Steppe may indicate that these changes were part of a larger phenomenon. On the other hand, Kohl hypothesizes the possibility of a push-pull process in which new groups of people with wheeled chariots and ox-pulled wagons gradually moved from the steppes of the north into the southern Caucasus, and the Kura-Araxes communities subsequently moved further south. And by the way, this is talking about the Proto-Indo-Europeans, or the Yamnaya people, with these wheeled chariots coming out of the North Caucasus, south of the Caucasus, and then pushing the Kura-Araxes people further into the Middle East. So that's what they're talking about. Kohl also reminds us of the evidence of increased militarism from the early to the late Bronze Age that is reflected in more fortified sites, new weaponry, and new iconography of war on scene on the Karasheb Cup. Kohl argues that while the number of Kura-Araxes settlements decreased in the southern Caucasus, archaeological research indicates that the Kura-Araxes culture spread to western Iran and the Zagros region and to the Levant. So these Kura-Araxes people start to basically migrate, as I said, deeper into the Middle East after they slowly started getting pushed further south. So continuing, it says, in Kohl's view, these new groups of people moved in. The Kura-Araxes communities abandoned the southern Caucasus and moved further south, where some of them already resided. Others associate the cultures of the post-Kura-Araxes period, especially in Tir-Aliti culture, with movement of people from the Near East, possibly the expansion of Hurrian tribes. And we've mentioned plenty of times in the past that it is believed that the Hurrians are one of the descendants of the Kura-Araxes culture. So this makes sense that we're seeing the expansion of the Hurrians at the same time as the expansion of the Kura-Araxes people, because they're one and the same. And these Hurrians are going more into the Near East, like the Kura-Araxes culture. But anyways, continuing, it says, the Kura-Araxes culture may have disappeared in various ways. The transition to the post-Kura-Araxes time may not be explained by a single model. Different Kura-Araxes settlements may have ended differently. At Kohen Shenir, the Kura-Araxes culture ended around the middle of the 3rd millennium BCE. The evidence from Kohen Shenir may point to a non-violent end or a planned abandonment of the site. As the excavations at Nadir Tbilisi and other sites show, the demise of the Kura-Araxes culture remains enigmatic. While different Kura-Araxes settlements may have ended in different ways, it is remarkable that the culture seems to have disappeared at about the same time over a very extended area. Although the ends of Kura-Araxes settlements do not fit a uniform pattern, they apparently were part of a large-scale phenomenon. So the main part of this paper that I want y'all to keep in mind is that the Kura-Araxes culture began to migrate from the southern Caucasus. This was during a time of a lot of warfare as well, but it began to migrate deeper into the Near East, and certain groups like the Hurrians would have been part of this migration of Kura-Araxes people deeper into the Near Eastern world, and these sites began to just disappear in the southern Caucasus. They ended for various different reasons. Warfare, some say just new groups coming in, just people abandoning their sites. So these groups of people started to just migrate and find new homes in warmer parts of the Middle East. So here's just where I was talking about where the Kura-Araxes is situated, south of the Caucasus, and then it began to migrate further into the Near East, where you had Semitic peoples, and then they went even deeper, going as far south as the Levant, as you can see right here, the Kerbet-Kerak culture, wire culture. So let me just do that a little bit faster so you can see. So boom, boom, boom. You have a migration of Caucasian peoples into the Middle East. You can see this based on culture. So the Kura-Araxes decline and disappearance was around 2450 BCE, which was the mid-3rd millennium. This occurred everywhere at the same time. The reasons include, as I said, environmental factors, abandonment of settlements, and warfare. But the Hurrians could be one of the surviving descendants of the Kura-Araxes culture, which leads to the next important point. The Kura-Araxes culture managed to survive in the Levant. After the fall of the Akkadian Empire, survivors or descendants, whatever word you want to use, of the Kura-Araxes culture appeared in the early Bronze Age Levant. Altogether, the early Transcaucasian culture enveloped a vast area, approximately 1,000 kilometers by 500 kilometers, and mostly encompassed on modern-day territories the southern Caucasus, northwestern Iran and northeastern Caucasus, eastern Turkey, and as far as Syria. The name of the culture is derived from the Kura and the Araxes river valleys. Now here's the important section that you need to hear. It gave rise to the later Kerbet-Kerak wire culture found in Syria and Canaan after the fall of the Akkadian Empire. So again, after the fall of the Akkadian Empire is when you see a branch of this Kura-Araxes culture appear in Syria and Canaan land. So the Kerbet-Kerak wire culture is a type of early Bronze Age Syro-Palestinian pottery first discovered at this site. Kerbet-Kerak Kerbet-Kerak culture appears to have been a Levantine version of the early Transcaucasian culture, also known as the Kura-Araxes culture. So this appeared in the early Bronze Age. That's another keynote. So the Kerbet-Kerak wire culture is the description commonly given to an important diagnostic Semitic type known from excavations of early Bronze Age 3 strata in various Levantine sites, named after the South Levantine type site of Kerbet-Kerak on the southern shores of the Sea of Galilee / Lake Kinneret. Kerbet-Kerak wire is also known as red-black burnished wire in western Syria and Akkad Valley context. In Transcaucasia, from which area it seems ultimately to have originated. And as we said earlier about the Kura-Araxes culture's pottery, it is, yes, indeed, a black burnished pottery with a red rim. So it's very interesting. We see the same type in the Levant. And this is from the early Bronze Age 3 strata. So let's learn a little bit more. This is a paper that deals with it. It's from Tel Aviv University. The paper is called Kerbet-Kerak wire culture, Kura-Araxes, and irons at Tel Bet Yerma, functional analysis and cultural context. And it reads, our analysis reveals a previously unreported component of food production and consumption practices in the South Levantine branch of the Kura-Araxes diaspora that offers a striking contrast to local Southern Levantine behaviors and traditions. So basically they're saying that this Kerbet-Kerak wire culture, which is a Kura-Araxes culture. It's part of the Kura-Araxes dispersa. Their food and their practices are different from the local Levantine peoples, and the local Levantine peoples would be Semites. So there's a difference between these two peoples in the Levant. This is with the paper details. It reads, the Amkum plain appears to have been the gateway to the Levant for Kura-Araxes people and for Kura-Araxes cultural disposition. So yet again, here is the Kura-Araxes settlements and sites, and the heaviest concentration is in the South Caucasus, then expands into Iran, Anatolia, and into the Levant. And this is all the sites of the Kara-Araxes culture. So here's another paper dealing with it. I'm just going to read different papers that talk about the Kura-Araxes culture going into the Levant. So here's the second one. It's called the Kara-Araxes in the Southern Levant, a case of ethnic identity. So it reads, in particular, strong parallels have been noted between Kara-Araxes and the Kura-Araxes cultural complex of Anatolia and the Trans-Caucasus. So from the same paper, this is detailing the sites of the Kara-Araxes culture. Here are all the sites. So they were kind of spread out all over the Levant, or the land of Canaan, or the land of Israel, whichever term you want to use. And here is another paper. It's called Ethnicity in Archaeology, a case for Kara-Araxes in the Southern Levant. And it has another map detailing the various Kara-Araxes cultural sites, or the, technically Kura-Araxes sites. Key sites in the Southern Levant, as you can see. Distribution of Kara-Araxes. And so here's from the same paper, a little bit of a larger map. Key sites in Anatolia and Trans-Caucasus and the Northern Levant. Here are all the sites. So that's just a visualization of these Caucasian peoples in the Middle East. So the Kara-Araxes is an offshoot of the Kura-Araxes culture. They have the same type of red, black pottery from the Kura-Araxes culture. And what's interesting about the Kara-Araxes is that it only appears in the Levant after the collapse of the Akkadian Empire. That's very important. It appeared in the Levant during the early Bronze Age 3 period. Now check this out. A tribe or a group of Kura-Araxes descendants who would have did this would have been the Hurrians. Remember from what we read in previous videos, the Hurrians migrated and created cities after the fall of Semitic civilizations in Mesopotamia. The population of people that came into the Levant would have been the Hurrians. The Hurrians are this Kara-Araxes culture, this branch of Kura-Araxes people. The collapse of the Akkadian Empire saw the arrival of peoples using Kara-Araxes culture, again after the collapse of the Akkadian Empire, coming originally from the Zagros Mountains east of the Tartarus, or the Tigris. And it is suspected by some that this event marked the arrival in Syria and Palestine, or Canaan, of the Hurrians, people later known in the biblical tradition possibly as Horites. So these Hurrians appear in Syria and in the land of Canaan, or in Palestine or Israel, whichever term you use, after the collapse of the Akkadian Empire, connected with the Kara-Araxes culture, which is a Kura-Araxes culture. a Caucasian culture. And we know the Hurrians are Caucasian people as well. So this is from World History Encyclopedia, the Hurrians, and it reads, when the kingdom of Akkad fell in 2190 BCE, the Hurrians and others exploited the consequent power vacuum in Mesopotamia. So again, when Akkad fell, that's when the Hurrians and other groups, just saw an opportunity to just go further south. Continuing, it says, there was no Hurrian empire as such, but some of the important city-states ruled by Hurrian kings may well have formed together in a loose confederation. Still others were in conflict with each other. So basically, again, when the Akkadian Empire fell, a Semitic empire, that's when Hurrians and other groups exploited this power vacuum in Mesopotamia, began to migrate into Mesopotamia and even further south. This is from Britannia, and it reads, the weakening of the Semitic states in Mesopotamia in 1550 enabled the Hurrians to penetrate deeper into this region, where they founded numerous small states in the eastern parts of Anatolia, Mesopotamia, and Syria. Just as a reminder, Hurrians would have been an ancient population that descended from the Kura-Araxes culture. So let me just quickly go over this. The Hurrian language, or languages, the Hurru-Uratrian languages, are an extinct language family of the ancient Near East, comprising only two known languages, Hurrian and Uratrian. Geographic distribution, Armenia, Anatolia, Syria, Mesopotamia, and the Zagros Mountains, which is the area of the Kura-Araxes culture as well. It is often assumed that the Hurru-Uratrian languages, or a pre-split Proto-Hurru-Uratrian language, were originally spoken in the Kura-Araxes culture. And this paper is called Hurru-Uratrian from the lexical statistical viewpoint, and it reads, the Hurru-Uratrian linguistic family consists of two closely related languages, Hurrian with several dialects and Uratrian. Despite the chronological distance between the attested Hurrian and Uratrian, it seems clear that the latter is not a direct descendant of the former, but the two languages represent two separate branches of a common proto-language, Proto-Hurru-Uratrian. For the pre-literate period, it is natural to associate the Hurru-Uratrian people with the Kura-Araxes early Transcaucasian archaeological culture. This is from Encyclopedia of Indo-European Culture, and it reads, in the period immediately prior to the emergence of the Hurrians, the northern area of their distribution was occupied by the Kura-Araxes 3,400 through 2,500 BC. The distribution of Kura-Araxes sites would encompass the territories of the Ito and Uratrians, as well as the northern part of the Hurrians. It is often presumed that the Kura-Araxes culture is an archaeological reflection of the Hurrians. So, with that being said, what is the genetic profile of the Kura-Araxes culture and thereby the Hurrians? What is the autosomal and the Y DNA? So this is from ancient human genome-wide data from a 3,000-year interval in the Caucasus corresponds with echogeographic regions. And it reads, we're going to read the section actually in yellow right here because it deals with the actual the Caucasus ancestry profile. So it reads, overall, this Caucasus ancestry profile falls among the Armenian and Iranian Chalcolithic individuals and is indistinguishable from other Kura-Araxes individuals. So let's keep these words in mind. Armenian and Iranian Chalcolithic. All right, that's the genome type. So continuing, it says, we're going to start right here. Indistinguishable from other Kura-Araxes individuals. Armenian Early Bronze Age. EBA stands for Early Bronze Age on the PCA plot, suggesting a dual origin involving Anatolian / Levantine and Iran Neolithic / Caucasus hunter-gatherer ancestry, with only minimum hunter-gatherer and Eastern hunter-gatherer / West hunter-gatherer contributions possibly as part of the AF ancestry. So what to keep in mind when it comes to the Caucasus ancestry profile: Armenian and Iranian Chalcolithic DNA, as well as Armenian early Bronze Age and Anatolian and Iranian Neolithic and Caucasus hunter-gatherer and Levantine. So those are the main components to keep in mind. So here is like a piece when it comes to the Kura-Araxes, and when it comes to Caucasus populations as well. We see Caucasus hunter-gatherer, we see Anatolian Chalcolithic and Iranian Chalcolithic. So here's a closer image of it. So this is the genome, or this will be one of the genomes of the Kura-Araxes culture. And when it comes to the Y-DNA from the same paper, we see most of the Y-DNA of the Kura-Araxes culture. We typically find overwhelmingly haplogroup J1 and J2, and J in general, out of all other haplogroups, which would be R and G, but most is J. So this is from EUpedia, Middle East Regional DNA Project, and it reads, the Caucasus was the birthplace of bronze metallurgy and the two great Bronze Age cultures that stemmed from it, the Myocope Yamnaya and Kura-Araxes cultures, expanded far and wide and reshaped the genetic landscape of Western Eurasia. Now here's the kicker. South Caucasians would have belonged to Y haplogroups J1 and J2, later associated with the Kura-Araxes culture. So haplogroup J1 and J2 of the Southern Caucasians is associated with the Kura-Araxes culture. Now we're going to read only what's in yellow. This is from How Eurasia Was Born, and it reads, the Northeast Caucasian language family seems to show clear links to ancient Eastern Anatolia, as most subclades of J1-Z1842 TMRCA 4300 BCE can be linked to the Armenian highlands and present-day Azerbaijan, precisely fitting the exact location of the Kura-Araxes culture. So J fits the exact location and time frame. 3400 BCE through 2000 BCE. Three subclades of it, J1-ZS3042 TMRCA is 3500 BCE, J1-ZS5658 TMRCA is 2800 BCE, J1-ZS2872 is 2800 BCE, and J1-Z5353 TMRCA is 2500 BCE, are widespread among Northeast Caucasian groups. Suggests Northeast Caucasian languages to have originated from the Kura-Araxes culture, as ancient J1 subclades also seem to have been present in the ancient Levant as well, which is what we're covering now. This with the Karakwar culture. This supports the existence of the Alduin language family linking Hurrian to Northeast Caucasian, which is what we read earlier. So, the genetic profile of the Kura-Araxes culture and thereby the Hurrians is this: Caucasus hunter-gatherer, Anatolian Chalcolithic, Iranian/Armenian Chalcolithic DNA, and Y DNA haplogroup J. The Hurrian tribes that came into the Levant likely carried this same genetic profile, or something very similar to it, more or less. Remember, the Hurrians are a non-Semitic people, so this would technically make haplogroup J and that genetic profile non-Semitic as well. And I would double down on that. I would say haplogroup J in its origin isn't Semitic. But I will say, yes, you do have Semitic speakers with haplogroup J today. But in its origin, it's not really Semitic. It's more Caucasian. So just to remind you about the Hurrians, reading what's in yellow, the Hurrian language was neither Semitic nor Indo-European. So just to remind you, this was from narrative literature of Hurrian origin, moving treasures from the ancient Near East. And this paper, or this book, is called The History of Ancient Palestine, reading only what's in yellow. Among the invaders of Syria during the second millennium BCE were the Hurrians, a non-Semitic people, which, as time went by, created one of the most powerful states in the Near East, namely the Levantine kingdom. Main thing to keep in mind is that the Hurrians are a non-Semitic people, and they had J in ancient times. So there is, evidence that non-Semitic inhabitants with Caucasian/Iranian DNA entered the Levant after the collapse of the Akkadian Empire, specifically in the early Bronze Age, from a genetic perspective. Is there genetic evidence of this from a DNA perspective? So this is the question that that we have to ask ourselves. I'm going to repeat it again. Is there evidence of a Caucasian/Iranian genome entering the Levant after the collapse of the Akkadian Empire in the early Bronze Age? Can we see this from a genetic perspective? That's what we're asking ourselves. So this paper literally details it. It's called Continuity and Admixture in the Last 5 Millennia of Levantine History from Ancient Canaanite and Present-day Lebanese Genome Sequences. And it reads, we next sought to estimate the time when the Iranian ancestry penetrated the Levant. Let me read that one more time. We next sought to estimate the time when the Iranian ancestry penetrated the Levant. So Iranian ancestry did in fact penetrate the Levant. And keep in mind, Iranians are not Semitic, that's Indo-European. But anyways, continuing, it reads, the most significant result was for mixture of Levant Neolithic and Iranian Chalcolithic around 181 plus minus 54 generations ago, which is around 5,000 plus minus 1,500 years ago, assuming a generation time of 28 years. The admixture time also overlaps. Keep this in mind. The admixture time also overlaps with the rise and fall of the Akkadian Empire, which controlled the region from Iran to the Levant between 4.4 and 4.2 KYA. The Akkadian collapse is argued to have been the result of a widespread airification event around 4,200 years ago, possibly caused by a volcanic eruption. Archaeological evidence in this period documents large-scale influxes of refugees from the northern Mesopotamia towards the south, where cities and villages became overpopulated. So what does this sound like? This sounds like the migration of the Kura-Araxes culture. This sounds like the migration of the Hurrians. This sounds like the migration of the Gutians. This is all starting to come together. Culturally, we can see it with the Kura-Araxes culture. Historically, we can see it with the Gutians. And, we can just see it with the Hurrians as well, putting all that together. So reading that last part again, archaeological evidence in this period documents large-scale influxes of refugees from northern Mesopotamia towards the south, where cities and villages became overpopulated. Future sampling of ancient DNA from northern Syria and Iraq may reveal if migrants carried the Iranian Chalcolithic related ancestry we observe in Bronze Age Sidon and Jordan. And so this paper right here was released in 2017. So this next paper that we're about to read is 2021. So, I'm emphasizing this because it says down below in blue, future sampling of ancient DNA from northern Syria and Iraq may reveal if these migrants carried the Iranian Chalcolithic related ancestry we observe in Bronze Age Sidon in Jordan. So they're wondering if future sampling of populations will reveal if this was indeed an Iranian population that brought this into the Levant. And so this paper literally will detail it. As you see down here, this paper is called The Genomic History of the Middle East and was released or published in 2021. So those questions were answered as this paper was released in 2017. So let's read the findings. It says, we found an ancestry related to ancient Iranians that is ubiquitous today in all Middle Easterners. Let me read that again. We found an ancestry related to ancient Iranians that is ubiquitous today in all Middle Easterners. So there is an ancient Iranian ancestry and influence within Middle Eastern populations. So continuing, it says, previous studies showed that this ancestry was not present in the Levant during the Neolithic period. Again, it was not present in the Levant during the Neolithic period, but appeared in the Bronze Age. Which is interesting because it fits with the Karabic-Karakwire culture, which also appears in the Bronze Age, coming around the same time from a similar location. And continuing, it says, but appeared in the Bronze Age where 50% of the local ancestry was replaced. So 50% of the local ancestry was replaced by a population carrying ancient Iranian-related ancestry. So we do see that there was a replacement of a local ancestry in the Levant. And those local people in the Levant would have been Semites. So I'm just going to read all this without pausing so much and interjecting. So we found an ancestry related to ancient Iranians that is ubiquitous today in all Middle Easterners. Previous studies showed that this ancestry was not present in the Levant during the Neolithic period, but appeared in the Bronze Age, where 50% of the local ancestry was replaced by a population carrying ancient Iranian-related ancestry. So we do see that there are Middle Eastern populations that have this Iranian ancestry, this ancient Iranian ancestry, and they weren't present in the Neolithic period. They appeared in the Bronze Age, and it replaced the local ancestry. So this population potentially introduced the Y chromosome haplogroup J1 into the region, and that's another thing. So this ancient Iranian DNA seems to be linked also to haplogroup J, specifically haplogroup J1. So when Iranian DNA was entering, this J1 was entering, and it entered in the Bronze Age. So we do see that people carrying Iranian DNA and haplogroup J coming into the Levant after the collapse of the Akkadian Empire. This only happened after the Akkadian Empire collapsed. This matches perfectly with what the Hurrians did in history, like we read earlier. Furthermore, we know that the people who collapsed the Akkadian Empire may have been a Hurrian tribe, a sub-branch of the Hurrian tribes. Some scholars are of the opinion that the Gutians were a branch of Hurrians from the Zagros Mountains. This is from ancient Egypt and the Near East, and it reads, during the last years of the Akkadian Empire, there were many incursions by fierce tribesmen from the southeast carrying out hit-and-run raids. These intruders were the Gutians. one of many peoples living in the Zagros Mountains, these raiders plundered the rich cities of Mesopotamian plains and were always long gone before an army could arrive to confront them. The Gutians pillaged all over the Akkadian Empire, although they occupied only a few remote regions. Finally, they destroyed Akkad itself. So after Akkad fell by the Gutians, this is when these Iranian J1 people started to penetrate deeper south into the Middle East. So this is from Encyclopedia of the Peoples of Africa and the Middle East, and it reads, the Halaf period was followed by the Hurrian period from 2600 to 6300 years ago, which was based in Mesopotamia and the Zagros-Tartarus mountain area of Iran. The Hurrian peoples spoke a language related to modern Chechenian. Check out my video on the Chechenians if you want to know about them. The Hurrians, in fact, comprised a number of clans and subclans, probably not Indo-European in origin. They dominated the area now known as Kurdistan, as well as Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. Sumerian writings dating to around 3000 BCE refer to the land of Kurda or Korda and the people living there as the Kurdukri and the Guti and other variants. These are thought to be the earliest written references to the peoples who would become known as Kurds. So here is Urartu, here is the Hurrians, here is the Mitanni, here is the Kurdi, as we said earlier, here's Kurda, and here is the Guti, or the Gutians. This is where the Gutians would have been. And so I'm only going to read what's in yellow right here. This is from the book The Chechenians, and it reads, the numerous clans of the Hurrians, such as the Gutis, and that's the main thing I want to keep in mind, the Gutis being a clan of Hurrians, such as the Gutis, and then I'm going to read just the others so y'all can know. Hattians, Kassites, established the Kassite kingdom of Babylon in the 15th century BC. The Kurti, Proto-Kurds, Mitannis, Mushki, and Uratrians formed empires and city-states which bore their names. The Kura-Araxes culture is also attributed to the Hurrians, which we read earlier. So the main thing I want you to get out of this is that the Gutians they may be a clan of Hurrians, because the Hurrians are like different clans. So the very people who collapsed the Akkadian Empire were the non-Semitic Gutians. We know that genetically the northern invaders had Caucasian/Iranian DNA and carried haplogroup J. This goes to show that the Semites in Mesopotamia, like the Akkadians, were genetically different from the Gutians. Linguistically and culturally, Gutians and Akkadians were not the same people. Both sides made that very clear in historical records. Therefore, logically speaking, they would be genetically different as well. They would not genetically be the same. Furthermore, it was literally people with Caucasian/Iranian DNA and haplogroup J that destroyed Akkad. Therefore, the Semitic Akkadians could not have had the genetic profile of Irano-Caucasian and haplogroup J. They could not have had that genetic profile. Remember, I can't stress this enough, this Iranian Caucasian and haplogroup J genetic profile was just now entering Mesopotamia in large waves. Therefore, it wasn't previously there in large numbers. And therefore, the Akkadians likely had a completely different genetic profile. After all, these invaders were non-Semitic, and the Akkadians were Semitic. The Akkadians, according to various geneticists, had haplogroup E. Therefore, J cannot be Semitic in origin. J was invading into Semitic territory. This is from Origin and Fusion of Human Y Chromosome Haplogroup J1-M267, and it reads, around the time of the Neolithic demographic transition, the genome-wide ancestry of West Asian populations was geographically structured into three groups. Among them, haplogroup J-M304 is found in the Caucasus/Iranian and Anatolian hunter-gatherers and farmers. And we just read about that. Here's the key part to keep in mind. But not in the Levantine ones. Unfortunately, so far, ancient DNA studies are missing from the Arabian Peninsula and Mesopotamia, where haplogroup J-M304 is frequent nowadays. So this is from How Eurasia Was Born, and it reads, certain distribution patterns suggest that this eastward expansion of the Indo-European family occurred through northern Mesopotamia, south of the Armenian highlands, for long populated by people of Alduin languages, Alduin is Caucasian, and ancient Indo-European lineages, presumably populating northern Mesopotamia before the Akkadian conquest. Lineages suggesting migrations to have occurred from Anatolia to northern Mesopotamia, including subclades of J2A-M47, J2B-Y22075, J2B-Z43946, Z43946, and J1-FGC6064. So they're saying that in northern Mesopotamia, where you have these Alduin Caucasian languages and these ancient Indo-European lineages, J was situated in that part of the world in that time before the Akkadians began to spread. So this is just further evidence that J really isn't Semitic in origin, that it's more ancient Indo-European and ancient Caucasian in origin. So continuing, it says, suggesting an Indo-European population in eastern Syria and northern Mesopotamia before the Semitic expansion. So, it says it right there, actually. So, from the same study, it reads, the most plausible candidates for Semitic remigration to the Fertile Crescent with TMRCAs fitting the arrival of the Akkadians and other early Semitic peoples are certain subclades of both E-V22 and E-V12, with respectively early TMRCAs present in the Middle East, could be candidates for such remigration, such as E-FGC1430, E-FGC14382 TMRCAs 2200 BCE, and E-V3262 TMRCAs 2600 BCE, which is basically the Bronze Age. So again, from this paper, it talks about influxes of people coming from the northern Mesopotamia towards the south. I'm going to read it right here. Archaeological evidence in this period documents large-scale influxes of refugees from northern Mesopotamia towards the south, where cities and villages became overpopulated. This would be your J markers coming into Mesopotamia, whereas the Akkadians likely would not have been J markers, they would have been E. So another thing to note is that Semitic languages were already being spoken before people carrying haplogroup J entered Semitic territory. I want to make that very clear. I'm going to do that in future videos as well. Again, Semitic languages were already being spoken before J entered Semitic lands. When the non-Semitic Gutians carrying Caucasian and Iranian DNA and haplogroup J invaded and conquered and destroyed Akkad, the Akkadians were already speaking one of the oldest Semitic languages. It's the Eastern Semitic language, to be exact. But, this is obvious, of course. But here's the kicker. Proto-Semitic languages were already being spoken in the Levant before haplogroup J arrived, which again kind of makes it impossible for J to be Semitic in origin. One of the origins of Proto-Semitic is in the Levant with the Natufians, and the Natufians did not carry haplogroup J, but they did carry haplogroup E, the same haplogroup of the Akkadians. This is from In Hot Pursuit of Language and Prehistory, and it reads, "This paper makes an additional inference, since there is archaeological and physical anthropological reason to believe that the Natufians were related to modern Semitic-speaking peoples of the Levant." This is from Paleolithic DNA from the Caucasus Reveals Core of West Eurasian Ancestry. Such a scenario would also explain the presence of Y chromosome haplogroup E in the Natufians and Levantine farmers, a common link between the Levant and Africa. This is from Continuity and Admixture in the Last 5 Millennia of Levantine History, and from Ancient Canaanite and Present-Day Lebanese Genome Sequences. And it reads, "We compiled frequencies of Y chromosome haplogroups in this geographical area and their changes over time in a dataset of ancient and modern Levantine populations, and note, similarly to Lazarus, that haplogroup J was absent in all Natufian and Neolithic Levantine male individuals examined thus far." Let me read that again. Haplogroup J was absent in all Natufian and Neolithic Levant male individuals examined thus far. And we know that, as we read earlier, Natufians and Levantine Neolithic males are believed to be the ancestors of Semites, so J wasn't present. So continuing, it says, "but emerged during the Bronze Age in Lebanon and Jordan, along with ancestry related to Iranian Chalcolithic." So when J entered the Bronze Age, it entered with Iranian DNA. So that kind of brings everything together to a certain extent. So the other origins of Proto-Semitic is in Africa. We've covered this before. Check out The Origins of Proto-Afroasiatic series that cover that. But the origins of Proto-Semitic is in Africa, other origins, and we know for sure that J wasn't in Africa if it couldn't even penetrate the Levant until the early Bronze Age. So check out my haplogroup E versus J video for information on that. But this leads to my next point. Haplogroup J was just now entering the Levant in the early Bronze Age when Proto-Semitic was already being spoken and expanding from the Levant. This makes it impossible for haplogroup J to be Semitic in origin, as well as Iranian/Caucasian DNA to be Semitic profile in origin either. But this does strengthen haplogroup E for being Semitic in origin, because J entered the Levant and brought their Kura-Araxes culture, which isn't Semitic culture, and is identified as Caucasian culture. So that's another thing. This Kura-Araxes Karakwara culture is not Semitic. It's always classified as Kura-Araxes or Caucasian culture. So that's another thing. J was associated with these Caucasian cultures in the Levant. Also, haplogroup J brought non-Semitic languages into the Levant. That's another reason why it's not Semitic in origin. They brought non-Semitic languages, which was previously Semitic and dominated by haplogroup E. Furthermore, it was Iranian DNA / haplogroup J that replaced the original population, which would have been Semitic. This is from Ancient DNA from Chalcolithic Israel, reveals the role of population mixture in cultural transformation. It reads, this find in contrast with both earlier Neolithic and Epio-Paleolithic Levantine populations, which were dominated by haplogroup E, and later Bronze Age individuals, all of whom belong to haplogroup J. We found an ancestry related to ancient Iranians that is ubiquitous today in all Middle Easterners. Previous studies show that this ancestry was not present in the Levant during the Neolithic period, but appeared in the Bronze Age, where 50% of the local ancestry was replaced by a population carrying ancient Iranian-related ancestry. This population potentially introduced the Y chromosome haplogroup J1 into the region. The Kura-Araxes is a type of early Bronze Age Syro-Palestinian culture first discovered at the site. Kura-Araxes appears to have been a Levantine version of the early Transcaucasian culture, also known as the Kura-Araxes culture. The collapse of the Akkadian Empire saw the arrival of peoples using Kura-Araxes pottery, coming originally from the Zagros Mountains east of the Tigris. It is suspected by some that this event marked the arrival in Syria and Palestine of the Hurrians, people later known in the biblical tradition possibly as Hurrites. When the kingdom of Akkad fell 2190 BCE, the Hurrians and others exploited the constant power vacuum in Mesopotamia. There was no Hurrian empire as such, but some of the independent city-states ruled by Hurrian kings may well have formed together in a loose confederation. This is why all evidence points to haplogroup J not being Semitic in origin. They actually conquered Semites and took Semitic lands. This is why haplogroup E is seen as Semitic in origin. Basically, haplogroup E is Proto-Semitic, whereas haplogroup J belongs to Proto-Caucasians. E-M34 is the main Middle Eastern variety of E1b1b and is thought to have arrived with the Proto-Semitic people in the late Copper to early Bronze Age. This is from EUpedia, haplogroup E1b1b. This is from EUpedia, Middle East Regional DNA Project. The Caucasus was the birthplace of bronze metallurgy and the two great Bronze Age cultures that stem from it, the Maya and the Kura-Araxes cultures, expanded far and wide and reshaped the genetic landscape of Western Eurasia. Southern or South Caucasians would have belonged to Y haplogroups J1 and J2, later associated with the Kura-Araxes culture. The Kura-Araxes expansion is further evidence of an Armanoid invasion of the Middle East. But also we can see this culturally, genetically, and linguistically. And this is where we end the migration of the Armanoids, the Kura-Araxes culture. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and don't forget to subscribe, share the video, click the bell, and leave a comment for any questions you might have. And with all of that out of the way, have a great day and shalom. Oh, also don't forget to follow my social media platforms that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. And now we say shalom.